Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Building an Agency, where it's my job to interview successful agency owners to learn what they believe to be the keys to succeeding with a client service business. We cover things like pricing, positioning your service, hiring, and a whole lot more. Today's guest is Michael King from iPullRank, which is a technical SEO firm turned semi full service marketing agency. If you want to learn more about all the services they provide and what they're doing, check out iPullRank.com, and also definitely check out iPullRank.com/runtime, which is just basically an awesome trailer about everything that they do. But going to continue here that basically iPullRank works with Fortune 500 clients like Beats by Dre, ABC Studios, Ralph Lauren, Complex Magazine, Citibank, and just a whole lot more. And so Mike himself has been coding since he was about 12. Then he started doing music for a living for, he says, about 8 years, where he was touring around the world before getting into an accident that stacked him with some serious medical bills. And then he needed to get a job basically to pay those off. And so that first job was at an SEO agency where basically, what, as he says it, he would work until he got sick of his boss, which is kind of a good, hint that a reason why he started working for himself. But until he got sick of his boss, and then he would go back to touring and making music, which at some point he had the realization like, hey, if I just stick with this SEO thing, I could probably make some serious money. So let me try that. Where, eventually after working at some big name firms in the industry, he decided to just do everything himself, which is why he started iPullRank, which is, really where I want to start off this conversation. So Mike, welcome to the show. How are you doing
Thanks
today?
for having me. I'm doing well, despite what my
Awesome.
background says.
I'm glad to hear it. Really, I just want to start, can you give us some background as to what you were doing at these kind of like larger agencies that you started working at before you decided to go out on your own?
Yeah, I would say the larger agencies were, a big learning experience for me, but I was effectively like an SEO analyst slash SEO manager. So when I went to Razorfish, I interviewed for like a full-time SEO analyst role. But for whatever reason, they didn't think I was good enough. So they made me associate SEO analyst. And it was a contract role. So I only had 24 hours a week. But I was like, just going hard because I was like, I really want to do this job. I really liked who I was working with. And the main thing was that to make them think that I wasn't qualified was that I had no experience like writing about SEO. When you work in a big agency, you don't actually do SEO, you just do deliverables about SEO. Whereas my experience prior to that was like people gave us their website and we adjusted it and fixed it for SEO. So from their perspective, like I was considered junior because I didn't have this experience. Now, the interesting thing was that as I worked with this team, which was an incredibly sharp team and everything was very polished, none of them knew how to do the things that we were doing. So, it just became a really weird situation for me because it's like, not only do I know what this stuff is and how to do it, now I'm also learning to communicate it in the way that they do. So when they ultimately weren't, still trying to hire me full time, I was like, all right, well, I'm going to go to another publicist agency and get an offer and bring it back, and then they'll have to hire me. And then ultimately I did that and they didn't. And so I moved to New York because Razorfish was in Philly. So in that role, again, is another learning experience for me because I'd never worked in like a big ad agency in this way. So Razorfish is basically like an interactive ad agency or whatever, but there was a big SEO team and it was, like I said, a pretty sharp team. Then when I went to Publicis Modem here in New York, I was the only SEO person. So I'm the SEO manager and it's like, all right, I now define this, right? Like the person that hired me quit before I started. And then like the person that they then had me report to was fired shortly after that. And then I was moved to the strategy team where I had this manager by the name of Tony Effick, who's by far, hands down, the best manager I've had in my life. And he really just like, helped me cultivate my skill set and grow it where it was broader. And I had a better understanding of like how what I was doing fits into the bigger picture marketing mix. And ever since then, it just like triggered some things for me that have allowed me to apply like this very interesting intersection of skills that I have to SEO and to, content strategy and content marketing and so on that has just made us very effective. So I would say that those two roles were largely about learning. And then when I went to those other agencies, that was more about like, okay, well, I've elevated this stuff. How do I bring this back to the SEO community and also sell it to clients?
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you were um, during that time, I guess, at those agencies, who was the primary clients that you were working with? Were these all big name brands, or some of them small? Like, what was the type of client you were working with at those agencies?
Absolutely. So those agencies were all enterprise brands, like all like Fortune 500
Hmm.
brands. And that was, like I said, like the learning experience. When I got to Razorfish and I'm working on, brands, these like crazy name brands, it's just like, oh, wow, I did that. I made this site rank number one for this
Hmm.
keyword. But obviously you're working with a variety of people to make it happen. And that was like a light bulb moment. It's like, oh wait, no, I can affect the brands I buy from. This is cool. Like,
Yeah.
so that's when I was just really sold on it, because at the time I was at Razorfish, I was still actively like touring, right? Because I moved my hours to be Tuesday through Thursday, and so I had the whole weekend to like
Hmm.
go to Europe and pop back and whatever I needed to do. So I was still like 1 foot in, 1 foot out. But as I got more of that experience, I was just like, yeah, I actually really enjoy doing this. So
Hmm.
let's figure this out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then you went deep on. Do you think that, one of the topics that I really want to talk with you about, which I think it's just easy to roll into now, is really the difference. You work primarily now with enterprise clients, right? At
Hmm.
iPullRank. And so what I'm curious about is I think, was that a conscious decision? Or like, did you start there with iPullRank? Or was that just like, that came about?
Yeah, it just came about. I started with just a couple of clients that just like happened to reach out to me. So, I worked at another agency prior to this, and actually, let's back up. There's an agency before the last agency that I worked at, and after that one, I was like, I'm pretty sure I can do this, and I kind of set my mind to doing it, but it just wasn't happening fast enough, and I was running out of cash, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna get a job. And
Hmm.
so I went and got a job, and 4 months in, I was like, yeah, this isn't for me. And so at this point, I had enough cash, and I was like, you know what? If this doesn't work out, I have 6 months of rent that I can work with, and
Yeah.
at least I've given it the good college try. Well, almost immediately when I made that decision, like two clients just came out of nowhere, you know, and like all of a sudden I'm making, almost like, 10K a month just off
Hmm.
of consulting. And I'm like, all right, well, I have a website. Let's, turn it into an agency site or a
Hmm.
consulting site or whatever. And I did that and just kept blogging and so on. And then, I started attracting more stuff. So the real reason why I've attract enterprises is twofold. One, I speak that language, and two, I built that personal brand. So once people heard that I'd gone out on my own, they just kind of came to me.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it was kind of a bit of both. Do you think that with running an agency that works with enterprise clients, do you think that just want to kind of get your perspective on like the pros and cons? Because there's a lot of people who are like, I think that there's the very non-attractive way of running, like, let's say an SEO agency working with like the local coffee shop for $500 a month and trying to do like
Hmm.
15 of those at a time.
Hmm.
Um, but you're on the complete opposite end of the spectrum where you like, I don't know, for better or worse. So that's why I want to get your perspective. Is it like, how much better is it to be, and then there's of course all the scale in between,
Hmm.
but like between working with medium-sized companies and large, like, why, let's just start with the good sides. Like, what do you like about working with enterprise clients?
Yeah, I mean, there's the impressive aspect of it, like kind of what you're alluding to. It's like, oh wow, you work with all these big brands. But then there's also the fact that, you can drive large scale change if you can push it through. And that kind of brings me to the things that can be difficult about it. You end up pushing back and forth a lot of paper, having a lot of meetings about meetings, and end of the day, you realize you're just a line item in this big mammoth company.
Hmm.
You're not changing too many people's lives. Like, yeah, you may have a couple clients that you help get promoted and things, and that's great. But more often than not, I find when we work with enterprise brands, you know, a lot of them just aren't that engaged. They're just like, okay, well, we hired an SEO agency, we must have done SEO. What else we got going on?
Yeah.
But when they are very engaged, that's when it's amazing, because they're like, oh, cool. Yeah, we'll help you get that business case. We'll help you get all that stuff done. We'll introduce you to the right people and so on. So it can go either way, you know?
Hmm.
And I mean, the reality of it is their checkbooks are bigger too. So that supports a lot of what you want to do. But you know, if we're just talking about the spectrum here, then you've also got the startups and small businesses that want, you know, everything for nothing, and everything is so dire, and everything has to be so urgent. And then you got people that are internal at these companies. They're like, no, we know everything. Why are we hiring an agency? So they make it difficult for you as well. So you can change lives, but you're gonna have a very difficult time doing it.
Hmm.
So what I find is that the mid market is actually the best, because you get the combination of them having the cash and wanting to actually execute on something, but understanding that they don't have the expertise. That's why they're working with you.
Yeah.
So you know, I mean, we've had clients all up and down the scales, but obviously the ones we put on the website are the ones that
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
enterprise, and you know that is most of our mix right now.
Yeah. And do you think that about the like checkbook thing, I think it's hard for people, even myself working with, let's say, like startups, smaller companies, like thinking about getting people to write those big checks, because you almost have to think like at that level, if you're not pitching a certain size retainer or something, they're like, why, like, we need to spend more on this, you know, like, why are you not more expensive, you know? And that's where I think like you had that story with, you know, like one of the agencies where they were like, don't automate this, just do it by hand because we need to bill the hours. Like, how do you manage that, like trying to bill high but then also being like, we're going to automate a lot of this so that we're not, so we're you know, so you're profitable and you're not pretending that you're doing a bunch of work by hand. So like, how do you think about that and manage that, you know,
Yeah, absolutely.
expectation?
The main thing is that we don't sell hours. We sell deliverables. So in my experience working at 5 different agencies, the hourly model never made sense to me, because you spend so much time like just trying to show activity and justify your existence
Yeah.
because you're billing on an hourly rate, right? And then, you know, when I worked at Publicis, I happened to see like the rate sheet for a client. They were billing me higher than my title because they had sold it with the guy that I said that hired me and quit. So they're not
Hmm.
gonna be like, oh, hey, we don't have that anymore, you know, like. And meanwhile, I'm sitting there, you know, not getting paid enough, like moving to New York, having to live in a shoebox basically, and
Hmm. And
you
they don't
know
want to
they're
they
billing
don't want
me
to promote you to then pay you that.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So like the hourly model just doesn't make any sense. It doesn't
Hmm.
support getting results for people or anything like that. So everything that we do is deliverable based, and there's a value associated with that deliverable. So whether it takes me 5 minutes or 5 months, the value you get out of it is the same. So it doesn't matter if I automate components of it.
Hmm.
Even if I did, you know, you still need me to help you work through it and make it happen, or my team, you know? So like we've always looked at it from that perspective of like value-based pricing through deliverables rather than showing activity.
Yeah. And are those deliverables like, hey, here's what our proposal is, like, of, hey, we want to rank, you know, this is obviously super oversimplified, but I don't want to get really complicated with it. But like, hey, we want to rank, you know, we're competing in this market and we want to rank for like these terms, but this other competitor, this other chain is outranking us. Or, you know, even in the e-commerce world, like we're trying to rank for shoes. Like we have no clue how to rank for shoes. Like, what are those deliverables? Like, you say like, hey, we're going to do the research, that's a deliverable, we're going to do this and that's a deliverable? Or is it like, we get you the result at the end of the month? Like, how do you actually do it? Like, hey, we finished this on the 14th and we're going to bill you for that? Or do you just say, hey, at the end of the month, this is what you're going to get? Like,
So it's more the latter. And the way that we do it is when we are going into the proposal process, we do a significant amount of upfront research. And so we'll be like, here are some high level problems that you have, and here are the deliverables which will solve that problem.
mhm,
And so then we put together a series of proposal options based on how big they want to go. So if they want a lot of content, they want links and so on, that's obviously going to cost more than just like, here's a series of deliverables, consulting deliverables, so that you can work with your team to execute this.
Hmm.
So then what we do is, based on the time frame that we believe it's going to take to deliver that, we we divide that total contract value by the number of months, and then that's the retainer.
Hmm.
So there's like, it's not necessarily like, okay, we're going to work with you for 1 month, we're going to do an audit, and now you rank for these 10 keywords. It's
Yeah.
more of like a bigger picture process.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense. And on the like pricing side, on the like working with enterprise clients, um do you get the pushback from some of them on like wanting, because they have to, like you talked about, like there's the people reporting to other people and like they need to justify expenses and whatever.
Mhm.
And do you ever get like pushback on people asking you for something that they could give over as in terms of hours, or how do you like handle those conversations? Do they come up?
Yeah, sometimes. And, we basically say divide it however you need to get to the hourly rate that you want, because we don't
Yeah.
sell hours, right? And so it's come up most often when there's like a procurement person involved, because what they want to know is like, what are the unit economics of the work so they can drive that cost down. And
Hmm.
so it's actually a good way for us to avoid that, because we're just like, look, here's what you're buying, here's what it costs, kind of take it or leave it.
Hmm.
Um, and the only discounting that comes about is when we're like, all right, well, if you want a discount, you got to pay it all up front. And so then it really always works in our favor, and actually works in their favor too, because when you're buying hours, there's situations where you can go over the cap of hours. And so you're not going to know how much it costs until it happens, right? Like you can,
Yeah.
of course, put in the contract where it's like, all right, we get 50 hours this month, and we've got to, approve you going over 50 hours. But if there's a project that's urgent and they get to the 50 hours, and of course agencies are going to look for ways to get to that 50 hours as
Hmm.
quickly as possible, they're going to go over that and you're going to spend more money.
Hmm.
So, a lot of the clients, or most of the clients that we speak to, they like our model because it's like finite. And if they want to buy more, they can certainly do that, but there's not going to be any surprises.
Yeah. I talked with someone. I know you're not doing like design or development things. You are doing some technical things, but I'm curious. Do you ever run into an issue? Because I deal with this at times where it's like you end up doing like support for free, where it's like, hey, can you like, there's this little problem, and it's like, yeah, we'll just take care of that. And like for me, a lot of the times it's like, just log in, change the little thing, and fix it, or like fix the
Mm-hmm.
problem, whatever it is. But I talked to someone actually the interview before this who said that they started offering, because of that problem, like as they got more and more clients, that was just like unbearable, because they were just doing basically free support lifetime, where it was like, hey, we just need you here. So they started offering like a flex support hours package, but all of
Mm-hmm.
their other prices are priced standard, not exactly to like an hour basis. So like I just want to get your take on that. Like, do you ever run into those problems, and like how do you deal with
Absolutely.
that?
Absolutely. So, similarly, we have something that we call ad hoc requests, and they're sold the same way we selling content, same way we selling links, where it's like you get a certain allocation of these things, and then you can use them towards whatever you need. So, and I think I need to further clarify that. So when we sell content, we sell content on a content credit system, which means, you can buy, let's say, 100 credits. One credit could be a blog post, 10 credits could be an infographic, and so on and so forth, right? So one of the reasons that we do that is because if we didn't, we'd have to pitch content every time and then get the budget for it and then do it, and that obviously slows everything down. So we have the allocation up front, and then we can put together a plan around it. So in the same token, I mean, token is the right word to use there. Ad hoc requests kind of work that same way. So you buy a bucket of those, and then you're like, oh yeah, we need this small thing. Cool. That's 2 requests. That's 5 requests. That's 1 request. And then that way we don't end up going over scope. The problem comes where, we'll have a client that's like smaller, and then, they go with a smaller scope, and then they start throwing, out of scope
Hmm.
things at us. And it can certainly get out of hand if we don't police it, but more often than not we police
Yeah, and then it like I'm just like thinking in the mindset, like I deal with this on occasion, like the all right, well, why, like, it's always hard with like the hours um versus value debate, because at some point you have to attach something to a level of effort, at a
Mhm.
minimum, or a level of value. And so like when someone says, hey, the infographic is 10 points, is that
Mhm.
like, is that based on the value you think the infographic is, or do you base that on like the amount of effort? You know what I mean? And then it gets you, like, when you start talking about effort, it's like you're back into like hours basically, and then they're like, okay, well, why is this 5? Why is this request 5 and this one was 3? That one looks like it
Mhm.
would take 10 minutes. And it's like,
Right.
now you're back in hours hell. And it's just like,
Right, right,
how did
right.
we get
Yeah,
here?
I mean, I just basically I avoid those conversations. The way I look at those value markers, it's more about the margin that I'm trying to achieve, right? So like, um, the basic standard metric that people use is like you want to make 3x of whatever you spend on a person, right? And so the unit economics of the content credits of the ad hoc requests are backed into that. So yeah, I mean there is like an hour level on the back end. It's just not on
Hmm.
the front end. So we're not having to report that. We can just be like, here's the accounting of how we've used your allocations, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense. You kind of like, you think about it a bit in the back end, you just do whatever you can to avoid those conversations because they could just
Yeah.
get out of hand. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Then, with the enterprise clients, I think that for a lot of people, even for myself, it's like the idea, you worked at some of these big agencies, so you had experience like with handling these sales processes and the operations of it. So for a lot of people, it's like that's a big responsibility to take on. And
Mhm.
it feels like, not understanding like the sales process there, like what in your mind does it take to actually, like, you seem to be pretty good at landing and working with these clients. Like, what does it take to actually be able to work with clients of that caliber or of that level?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is polish and again speaking their language because there's going to be so many SEO people that they've talked to, and frankly our industry in general is kind of like unpolished. Like the decks are not well designed, and you're so in the weeds talking about like links and keywords and so on. The people that you're dealing with at these big companies, more often than not, especially the decision makers, they're having like conversations about share of voice, and they want to see like Google Trends charts or something similar to that. So you got to be able to simplify but also show where your value is. And I think that's one of the things that we've been really good at is like, you know aligning what we do to what big enterprises are looking for, and also showcasing like how we've been at the cutting edge of this for a long time. um so and then end of the day, it also comes down to like, have you worked with other companies of our size? And I've been able to say that since the beginning, so
Hmm.
it's helpful. But another part of it is just like navigating the endless series of people that you're gonna have to deal with to make these deals happen. When we signed with one of the bigger industrial supply companies, it was like the first really big account that we landed at iPullRank. I think I talked to those guys for like 2 years
Yeah.
before that actually happened. And then like we had to fly out there, we had to pitch, we had to deal with procurement. There were just so many people involved. um, and then like once you land those, you got to give enterprise level service. So that means you're taking people to dinner,
Mm,
you're buying gifts, like you're doing all these things. So it's not for the squeamish.
yeah, yeah.
There's a lot more to it than just doing the work.
Yeah. And do you feel like, would you recommend, I think where I'm interested in, would you recommend someone trying to go down the route that you're on? Or like, if you could, I guess, like someone was asking you, like myself, is it worth it trying to build your brand around working with those larger clients? And like, if you maybe have some of that experience and you could get there, maybe you have some of those little things that you need, is it worth it going that route? Or maybe if it's not, like, what does it depend on? Like, what questions should you ask yourself before you make the decision to like, I want to work with big companies?
Yeah, I think it starts with like how well do you deal with people, and also how well do you deal with what you may think is BS, because like there's just so much process to navigate, so many gatekeepers to navigate, and you don't deal with that as much when you're talking about the mid market or startup. So, it really just depends on what is your propensity for dealing with that. And there are definitely times where I'm just like, oh, why am I doing this? You know? But more often than not, it feels good because of what we're able to accomplish with those brands. And then it's like, all right, once you get one or two of them, it begets getting, more of them, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, it really just comes down like what is your personality type and can you deal with, you know, pushing paper back and forth a lot before you get something done. But if I had it to do over again, I would probably, um, just put stakes in the ground around like 3 or 4 of these types of companies, and then fill everything else in with mid-market companies.
Hmm.
Um, but there's just so much growth opportunity with these big companies. It's just that you're not able to say as much about what you've been able to do. Like
Hmm.
there are results that we've driven for clients that I wish I could say out loud, right? Whereas when it's mid market, they're just like, yeah, we want to do what you're doing. We want to be the case study. We want you to talk about us
Hmm.
at the conference. So it's really about what works best for you.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And leading into that, what you just brought up about being talked about at a conference, I think like one of the things that I really want to, I think there's two topics that I really wanted to cover with you, which is like working with enterprise clients and whether that's right for you, which I think we've like talked a lot about that. And people I think can start to like let those gears turn in their head. The other thing that I think you are uniquely qualified to speak about is speaking itself.
Mm-hmm.
And you've seemed to have been able to, you've done a lot of speaking, and it seems to be like one of the primary ways that you've built your brand as a professional and built your agency. And so when it comes to, I guess I just want to like start, I guess we could start back again with the speaking, and just kind of
Mm-hmm.
like get into it from there. Like, when did you get into speaking? Like, what was the reasoning behind it? Like, let's just start back there.
Yeah. So I think I got to start a little bit before that,
Hmm.
because my music world and my SEO world kind of like intertwined. So the guy that I used to tour with, we were on a train in Sweden somewhere, and he was like, "Yo, Mike, I know you're doing this SEO thing. My cousin owns this SEO software company." I'm like, "Yo, who's your cousin?" He's like, "Yeah, his name is Rand Fishkin." I was like, "What?" And so
That's so random.
yeah, it's crazy. And so once I got to Razorfish, I felt like I had an email address that would be like considered cool if I emailed someone like him. And so I sent him a note, and he like hit me back in a couple of days, and he was super cool. And but the funny thing is, I was like, yeah, I'm trying to get into blogging, where do you think I should start? And he was like, don't. He was like, there's too many bloggers. I was like, oh, okay. And anyway, so I ultimately did start blogging, and the place I started was on Moz. This is 2011, and then once I got to Modem here in New York, I wanted to go to MozCon, and I was like, yo, I like just started at the job, and I was like, hey, can you guys send me to MozCon? They're like, yeah, we'll get back to you. We'll get back to you. And then ultimately they just, said no. And I was like,
Hmm.
cool. Well, I'm going to go on vacation, and I'm going to spend money, and I'm going to do this myself. And it was the smartest thing I did, because like I met everybody, and I had been blogging for Moz at this point. My posts have been pretty popular. And then I also saw Will Reynolds speak for the first time. And I was like blown away. And, it's also one of those things like for like representation, when you see someone that looks like you on the stage,
Hmm.
you're like, oh, they allow us to do this too? Cool. And so like while I was watching him, I pitched for SMX East, and I got it. And so I went on this whole like connecting with all types of people, because I'm like, all right, I have this idea I want to talk about, and no one else is really talking about it. So let me just like vetted with a few people, and like I did the slides, I printed them out, I put them on the wall in my apartment, and I practiced so much. And the day came, and it went really well. And so Tom Critchlow, who used to be at Distill, he was running Distill New York. He had just stood it up, and he saw the video that someone had like streamed. I think it might have been John Doherty who had streamed it on, you know, whatever the streaming platform was at that point. And he saw it, and he was like, "Yo, do you want to speak at Search Love New York?" And I'm like, "Yes." And so it's just like a snowball effect. And you know, I had built up such a name for myself because not only was I speaking a lot suddenly, I was also like continually blogging. So, you know, the more I blog, the more people ask me to blog and so on. And, you know, I just kept getting invited to stuff. And at a certain point, you know, my life at my job didn't align with my life in the SEO industry. It's like, you know, people are telling me the day before projects go out at Modem, like, "Hey, can you press the SEO button?" I'm like, "Yo, that's not how any of this works. How do you not know this?" And so at that point, I was like, "Yo, I need to go work somewhere else," you know? And for lack of a better term, I kind of created like this bidding war across a bunch of different companies that wanted me. And, you know, I ultimately moved on, and it was just because I built so much in thought leadership. And to, you know, one of your core questions around consulting and stuff, I was attracting a lot of that while I was still working at Modem as well.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I would just like be doing this work in the background because no one really cared what I did at that company. So I'm like, all right, well, I'm gonna work on this other stuff.
Uh-huh. It
Um,
all looks the same on your computer, and you know,
right, right, exactly. And so I'm doing all this work, and you know, even then I was like, maybe I should consider just like going solo or whatever. It seems like, you know, this is turning into something for me. But it was such a daunting idea, especially living in New York where everything is so expensive. And so I was just like, nah, let me just, you know, get
mm-hmm.
another job. And then when I went to that next agency, they hired me just to be like a thought leader. They're like, oh, this kid is on a wave. Like, let's capitalize on this. And so they were just like, cool, go speak everywhere. And I was going to like, you know, Australia and all over Europe and all this.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just helped me continue to build the brand. And that's the
Yeah, and so
most valuable asset.
they paid for you to build your brand essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so with that, like I think that there's like that period where like you started blogging for Moz and you didn't have your own blog at that time, or did you have just whatever you're publishing on other platforms?
I published a couple things here and there, and they're still actually up on iPullRank.com, but like I didn't care as much about my blog because I wasn't trying to build a business. I was just like, let me get these ideas out. Like, here are things that I've been doing. It doesn't seem like people are talking about. Let's get this out. I was just excited
Mm-hmm.
about it. It was just like, you know, when I would make songs, I'd be like, yo, I made this song when everyone would hear it, you know? And so
Yeah.
it was just like, let me post it in the places where I'm going to get the most value out of sharing this stuff and the world to get the most value. So it wasn't about building up my site. It was like, I just want to share stuff.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I think a lot of people, it's like, oh, you want to have like your site and grow an email list, and like you kind of just like went the like you went the opposite route where everybody's like, you need to have your own site, you need to have an email list, like own your own stuff. But like you probably had like a Twitter account and like your name, and you had the site, but you weren't like actively doing as much there. Do you think like would you go that route again? Like, because I think especially in like we can use SEO as like the most crowded version of this, like
Mm-hmm.
trying to build your name, because
Mm-hmm.
I think that SEO is all about like ranking and everybody's all about content. And so like you just get everybody producing content. Like, so what would you recommend? Like, would you recommend taking that approach or going more the approach that you went if you could?
I mean, again, I think it depends on your goals. You know, I think it's very smart to do like a Brian Dean type approach where you're just like building your list and having, you know, the best possible content on a subject or one of the best on a subject. I think that's really smart because you can monetize that list any number of ways, right? But he's not trying to do consulting, so it doesn't really make sense for him to take my approach. Like he's just trying to, you know, sell info products and build tools and things like that. So that makes complete sense for him. For
Mhm.
me, it's all about visibility and again sharing ideas, which also just create a lot of goodwill across the industry. Um, most people in our space, like if I needed something, they're happy to help me, and
Mhm.
I think that just comes from years of like kind of selflessly putting things out and being like, yo, do you need help with this and blah, blah, blah. Because I didn't really want anything back. I was just like, yo, let's just do some dope stuff
Mhm.
and everybody win. So yeah, I think it's all about goals because, for me, it has been about agencies and driving clients and so on. So the approach it's up to you. I
Yeah.
think
Yeah.
I think you could do what Brian Dean does in the way like for a company like mine. I mean, effectively that's what Neil Patel is doing.
Mhm.
No matter how you feel about what Neil Patel does, but that is his approach. He guest posts here and there, but he's more like, let's get all the content back to us. So I think he said he gets like 2 million visits a month or whatever. That's incredible for an
Yeah.
agency, whatever site he is. So yeah, I think it all depends on your goals because either of those approaches can obviously work.
That makes sense. I'm wondering, there's one thing that you said there about doing your first talk it was like an interesting idea or an interesting topic that people really like. It wasn't something that people were talking about. I think that choosing, like, let's say you get a speaking opportunity and like
Mm-hmm.
trying to decide on a talk or like figure out a talk, because not everybody, I mean, I think you had some experience as well from like touring where like getting on stage was like you were fine doing that, but it was like I think there's this whole other part about like what you're saying. Like you could be charismatic and like be good at speaking, but like the topic could be boring. And like, so how do you think about like choosing, like what makes a good topic for a talk or maybe even just like a big piece of content like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's basic content strategy. You got to be mindful of what the audience is, what they're there for, and then what is it that you can do that is valuable to them. For me, because I spend so much time in front of like SEO audiences that have been complaining like, oh, things aren't advanced enough. Cool, I'll show you advanced. Like that. That's what I do. Like
Mhm.
I want to do things that I would be excited to see. But there's also instances where I speak at broader conferences where like, the technical stuff is just too much. People are walking out of the talk or they're just like, I don't get any of this. So in those cases, I more speak about like content strategy things where there's a lot of tools and a lot of like, case studies and tactics and things like that. So it's like we can talk on the strategy layer. We can also talk on the tactical layer. But I always want to make sure that people can walk away with something that they can try. So my
Mhm.
goals are not to be boring, show you something you've never seen, and give you the opportunity to try something. Um, the where I struggle is that when you put me on a room with a bunch of like C-level people, they don't want to hear tactics. They just want to hear, a TED talk. And I never feel like I'm giving enough value when I do those.
Mhm.
And people have given me feedback like, "Oh, this is great. I love what you had to say," and blah blah. But I'm like, I don't feel like you got anything out of that.
Yeah.
Um,
It's like a
but
intro to SEO overview. Like,
yeah,
yeah. And
Google is a thing. People use it. you know,
yeah.
Voice search is the future. Like I've never really liked doing those.
Yeah.
But yeah, it all just comes down to what are you trying to accomplish and what is it that your audience needs, and then how do you meet at that intersection, basically.
Yeah. And do you think that, I mean, now everything, I mean, talking about speaking right now is just such like a weird topic for anyone who's listening to this. Like we're
Mm-hmm.
in the middle of, maybe at the end, hopefully towards the end, like we don't really know what the
We're
whole
just starting.
yeah. We're like everybody's just praying. um Nobody really knows, but like COVID-19 is a real thing, and like the impact, like right now, if you were at that place you were in New York City, like the idea of speaking wouldn't really be a possible reality. Do you think, like, where do you think things are heading on like the internet conferences, stuff like that? Do you think they resonate as well? Do you think there's as much value out of doing those? Like what do you see as like the future of like this speaking conferences online sort of thing?
Well, if I was doing this now, um, you have people's attention more than you've ever had it before. So there's this is a perfect time for someone to come out in this medium and like take it over, right? Like, um, think about Gary Vee. Gary Vee, you see him more online than you see him speaking, and he built his brand through this type of stuff. So it's really just like, what is your angle, what is your hook, and so on. And once you've identified that and figured out a way to make it resonate with people, this is a perfect time to come up.
Hmm.
Um, as far as like the virtual conferences, I personally am not a huge fan of them. Um, because I've been doing so many webinars and things like that, right? Like if I can't speak, we've got to get in front of people in a variety of ways, and so that's what we've been doing. And I don't really want to do more fancy webinars. Like that's largely what the virtual
Yeah.
conferences are. I really appreciate what Moz did though, like with MozCon, because they tried to maintain the same level of production value, or at least a level of production value in this type of medium. Like
Hmm.
everything was pre-recorded, all the speakers had material sent to them, like cameras and ring lights and so on, so that they could all look good and we could all have the same level of quality. um but I made a movie because I was like,
Yeah.
why don't we maximize this medium? And I don't expect everyone to make a movie, but for me, it was like, all right, you've seen me do webinars for the last 6 months. Like, let's do
Yeah.
something special. Because for me, MozCon has always been like the Super Bowl of SEO conferences. And so, I just wanted to figure out ways to level up. So I think that people are going to get fatigued from all this stuff because, again, everyone is doing mad webinars right now. And why would I pay for a virtual
Yeah.
conference and whatever? So I think that more and more people are going to have to figure out ways to level things up to make it valuable to people.
Yeah, and I think that's a great way to talk about. Like, I do want to, touch on Runtime, which is this a movie that you made about the work that you do. So it's like, hey, here's what we've actually, or what actually goes on in our world, shortened up for the Hollywood effect, and just
Mm-hmm.
like, but in a like, the production value like was really awesome. Like taking it like it's all animated and like it's not just two people in a recording like this, not to like call myself out here, but you know what I mean, like it's like a step above. And so I'm just curious, like, I guess to start, like, how much like what does it take to create something like that? Like, I know you had some people on your team that were doing some of the stuff for you. Like, was it a serious investment, or was it just something that like was surprisingly affordable? And you could
So
take that in
first,
whatever way you want to take it, you know what I mean?
yeah. So first, thank you. Um, and yeah, it was a lot of effort. I wrote the script. I had a little help from one of our writers on the team as well, because she's a real writer, so she polished what I wrote and she added a bit to it. And then we've got two designers on the team that did the bulk of the work. But Maz had a timeline that we needed to hit, so we actually brought on a couple additional animators to help out at the last minute, a couple extra editors to help out at the last minute, and so on. But had we had more time, we would have been able to just do it all in house, like entirely.
Hmm.
Even like the song that you hear at first is a member of my team who's also a voice actor for two of the characters. So we were able to get a lot of it done in house, just for the opportunity cost of these people's time, really. Um, but yeah, ultimately, it was about what we would spend on creating and promoting an ebook, right? Like it
Hmm.
wasn't that expensive. It's really just like you got to have the people that can be creative to come up with the idea and the execution and so on. And I had the idea, but Melissa, our design lead, she like made it real. She was like, all right, here's how we can execute this. She had three different visual concepts that we went through. And we were like, yo, we don't got a lot of time, but that first one is the illest. So how do we make it happen? And yeah, it was very much a team effort. It really was not just me. And everyone stepped up as needed to make it happen. But yeah, I definitely think that it's something that more people should figure out how to do their own version of. And I don't even mean like a movie. What is something creative and different and will stand out. Like, we're all marketers, right? Like, aren't we supposed to
Yeah.
stand out as our first thing? And you should definitely figure out ways that you can do something that makes the experience of people attending your virtual session or whatever it is better. And again, I think Moz did a great job, like, across the board by making an experience and a platform and a portal and all that. But I think it's something that more and more people need to think about as far as, like, how do we attract people to continue to watch these things?
Yeah, it's almost like, all right, we've been doing the infographic ebook kind of thing for so long. Like, what is the next? Like, why
Yeah.
don't we come up with something new? Do you think that, like, after having done this, I know you don't want to just like, let's just try and do it again with some idea that maybe isn't as good, but like, like, do you think that you'll be trying to do more of this? Like, I think what I'm trying to get at is it like more valuable maybe for you to do something like this, once, twice a year or something like that, rather than like the small, like smaller like blog posts? Like, if you could divert your effort to one, do you think that doing something like this is the way to make a splash right now and get that attention?
It's definitely a way to make a splash, but I don't think we should, put all our eggs in one basket. I think we need to continue to diversify content types. The way I look at it is everything is content. Obviously we're having a conversation right now that can be used as like 40 different types of content.
Hmm.
But at one point I was doing like comic strips and my first MozCon talk, I came out and I was rhyming over the Mad Men beat with a kinetic typography video behind me. Like, there are so many ways to approach things. It's just really about being creative and figuring out what's gonna resonate with your audience. So as far as runtime, I think that's a one-time thing. Like, I don't think we should do that again. But what we've also been thinking about is for the training program that we're building, using those characters and building the story arc out a bit more. So it's like kind of like an interactive experience
Hmm.
in a highly produced, training environment. Because all the elements are there in that story. Like,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
can
yeah.
be that character solving these problems.
It
But yeah, I
reminds
don't
me a
know.
lot of it reminds me of, have you heard of Flexbox Zombies or Grid Critters?
No.
It's two, you got to check it out. So I'll send you a couple links after this, but this guy David Gedsky, I think is his name, he created this like Flexbox training, and it's called like
Mhm.
to learn CSS Flexbox, and it's like using like repetition based training to like master Flexbox. And I did it when I was just like, oh, let me learn this like tool like a while ago, and it was just like I had never forgotten it, because the whole idea is like he
Mhm.
has this character that's like, oh, you have to like shoot these arrows and you have to like line up your guy with the zombies and stuff like that, and like, and it's that sort of thing. But you should
That's
check it
super
out, because
cool.
the Flexbox Zombies one is free and the Grid Critters one is like $300 or something like that. But it's like there's super high production value, just like this, but like it has a
Mhm.
story to bring you through the training, and like it's the best. I've spent money on other trainings as well, and this one is like the one that's, you can't get it out of your head, because like I
Mhm.
just think about, um just an idea for you to think about. I'll send you the links to that after this, but
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly what we'd be looking to accomplish. And I think, there's nothing like that in the SEO space. Like, everyone has an info product of some kind, but no one is like built the code academy with like a, story on top of it type of thing.
yeah, you'll definitely want to check these out. It's basically like I could see it now already with the characters you got. Like, I can already see it in my mind. But
Hmm.
I want to, we've got just a few minutes left here, so I want to ask you just like one final question for people that are like in a similar position to maybe when you were getting started and you were going out on your own and you were looking to like start your own brand and really like make a thing out of iPullRank. Like, I guess if you could give yourself one piece of advice back then, like what would you tell yourself to do to like make your life easier? Or, and if it's hard for you to tell yourself advice, because I know it can be, like, what would you tell someone else that's in a similar position that you're at, that's looking to get started?
Now, it's funny. A few years ago, I wrote a post like this. It was like me writing to my past self. It's on Medium.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I said to myself was stay home, spend more time making content than like going out to speak. Because for me, at a certain point, speaking had like diminishing returns. And every time I put out content, the leads just like flooded in. So I would say, once once I was 2 years into iPullRank, I should have cut back on the speaking and just done more content on the site.
Hmm. Awesome. Yeah. So basically the lesson there for everyone is start creating content if you haven't been, and double down on actually making it. And now you can't go anywhere, so you got no excuse. You're
Exactly.
home all day
So now I'm
anyway.
making movies.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, this has been really awesome. I just want to ask, like, what's like the best place if anybody wanted to ask you a question or anything, like where's the best place to reach you? Like, where are you online?
Yeah, reach me on Twitter, iPullRank, or on the site, iPullRank.com, or just email me, Mike at iPullRank.com.
Awesome. Thanks a bunch. And yeah, everybody, I recommend go check out iPullRank.com/runtime to see that video. And yeah, Mike, thanks again.
Shane, thanks for
Happy to
having
have
me. I
you
really
back in the
appreciate it.
future here.